Hey folks, hope you guys are doing great. Let me get my stuff all set up here. Welcome to the Writestream. Today's subject is going to be National Novel Writing Month. You know, if you're not familiar with National Novel Writing Month, it's really now kind of World Novel Writing Month. People, they created like a little shortened hashtag NaNoWriMo. So now maybe it's WAMO-RIMO. WOMO-RIMO, whatever. So anyway, National Novel Writing Month is just, it's a thing. I don't even remember who first started it, where you can try writing a novel for a month. Now, there's a couple things that I want to say about National Novel Writing Month before I get into all of my announcements and things like that. So the first one is that unless you're writing a fairly short book, because the goal is 50,000 words, focuses on what I call the drafting process. Unless you're writing a fairly short book, which is totally possible, doable, and appropriate, you're probably not going to finish a book in a month. However, it's a great opportunity to get deep into a draft and to engage what I call the boot camp mentality. That is, doing something at a very intense level for a short amount of time. A month may seem like a lot of time, but it's actually a fairly short amount of time to be doing something like writing a book. So doing it for an intense amount of time, to me, about 4 weeks is 4 to 6 weeks. 6 weeks is really the limit of what you can do. And oddly enough, if you go look at military programs, 6 weeks is about what most of the most intense programs end up equaling out to. During those 6 weeks, you can do almost anything. You could tolerate almost any amount of stress for 6 weeks. But beyond that, it's going to be significantly more difficult. But what it will do is it certainly will train you with good habits that you can continue the rest of the year, including writing every single day, to help you complete whatever projects you want, whether it's writing or some other creative project that you have. So that's my little intro to that. Let me deal with some announcements. We'll check some chat, and then I'll give you the lecture for today, which is basically going to be the absolute most condensed, most precise, and most simplified version of how to write a book that I can do. That's what I'm going to give you today. So I'll have every element that you need to know to actually write the book and do it in a month, without a whole lot of superfluous information. Hopefully, you guys know how I like to drone on. So let's start with channel announcements. Okay. So first thing I want to point people to is I do have a new book out. It's called City of Silver, and here's a link to it right now. You can get the paperback for $6.25. You can get the ebook for 99 cents or read it for free on Kindle Unlimited. This is the first part of a new series. I know I like to start new series. Is sometimes kind of test stuff out. This series, I've already written the first, 5 or 6 books. They just have to be edited. And because this is a fairly early book, the editing is a little bit more. There's more to the editing process than a book I would write now. A book I would write now, there's virtually no editing that has to be done. It's just cleaning up things, doing proofreading kind of things, and then putting it out. For this, it's a lot of rewriting, condensing scenes, removing scenes, replacing scenes, which would be rewriting, changing lots of different things, lots of different details. There's a lot that goes into editing these because, again, they were earlier works. They were written at this point 6 or 7 years ago, quite a while ago, and I haven't really looked at them in about 4 years. But I'm finally at a place where I could really revise these and turn them into great products. So that's what I'm going to do. Short explanation of this, if you're familiar with my other fantasy stuff, not that. That's a manga. Like Needle Ash or Water of Awakening, these books. So if you're familiar with these, it's technically in the same universe, just in a far future of these books, and so things are a little bit different. The society is quite a bit different, and magic is not something that is kind of normalized. Like, this is more traditional fantasy. Moonsong is more dark fantasy, and it also has guns in it. So it's very much in the what I would call the late Renaissance, late Renaissance technologically, if you want to think of that, with some magic elements that will change as we go. Some people call that like clock punk. Clock punk, I think, is something a little bit different, but I'm okay to work alongside that type. So that's what's up with that. So please take a look at that if you're interested in that book. People really love the cover, and a lot of people seem to really like the story. My wife, in particular, has a lot of attachment to it. Another project I want to point you to that I am actually included in. It's a Strange Adventures pulp magazine. And so this is a Kickstarter that's being done by a friend of mine, Jesse White. He's a Canadian comic artist and musician, actually. He was the lead singer for Aquas, I think is how you pronounce the name, a prog metal band. And he's a fabulous singer, great musician, great artist, kind of a polymath kind of guy like me. In fact, his YouTube channel is called Pursuits of a Polymath. So he's putting together a pulp comic magazine, focuses on the comics. It's primarily black and white, so if you like the black and white style stuff of the 70s, like Savage Sword of Conan in particular is his strongest influence, and to me he looks, or his art style reminds me the most of John Buscema, probably with just a little bit of a different approach to certain aesthetic designs, which you'll find when you look at that. So if you like manga in particular, if you like black and white manga stuff, you'll probably enjoy Jesse's art. He's very, very good at it. It's very clean. It's very good. So please take a look at that and consider backing that. Now, one of my stories is actually in this. The story is called Socknet, and it's semi-dystopian sci-fi story about a guy who's neural implant, which instead of having phones, we have it implanted in our heads. It malfunctions one day, and he ends up having a couple of misadventures as a result, and he begins to see the world as it actually is without the distraction of a screen in front of his face, preventing him from understanding exactly how his life is being manipulated and how he's not really living a true life. So please do check that one out as well. And he also has some other illustrated fiction written by my brother-in-law, actually, written by Matt Wellman, that looks interesting, based on Immortal Fear, one of his urban fantasy books. And there's even some other, I don't even know how to describe it, more impressionist art matching a story. So there's a lot of variety there, which is great. I really enjoy the variety. There's fantasy stuff, sci-fi stuff, horror comics. There's everything that you could want. So please do check that out and consider backing that, and it will definitely help to bring more things like this into existence in the future. And I think there's a 9,000 goal. There's $1,800 so far. We have the rest of the month to kind of fill that out, and hopefully we'll be able to do that. So those are the announcements. Let me take a look at the chat, and then I'll give you a little lecture on National Novel Writing Month. Looks like some of you already planned books, which is great. If you planned before, I really should have done this before November, but a lot of people, they stumble at the beginning of November and they need a little bit of help, and so it's kind of appropriate. Plus, we have October. It's good to talk about horror stuff for that. For me, I'm just so you know what I'm doing for National Novel Writing Month. I'm not really writing a novel. I'm just continuing that horror story that I started on stream last week. I expanded it into what's going to hopefully be about I don't know how long it's going to be. Right now it's about 10,000 words. I expect it to go another 5 at least. So it'll be a novella length horror story. So it'll fit in nicely with Lovecraft, and it's got a lot of moods that I think are reminiscent of Lovecraft or certain Stephen King short stories that I think people will like. I decided to take it in a different direction. Not a totally different direction, but a direction that I think is more psychological and more uncertain and very frightening to me. So I'm enjoying writing that, and the enjoyment of writing horror is usually like, man, I think this is going to be effective. That's the satisfaction of making something cool. So that's probably what I'll be doing, and then I don't know what I'll fill out the second half of the month with. Either I'll work on editing the next Moonsong book. I'll finish up and prepare. This isn't really writing the novel, but I'll prepare for publication the Crucifixion book and get that going. Or I'll start on Eternal Dream number 3. Actually, I already started on it, so I'll pick up where I left off and get deep into the drafting phase on that. We'll see how it goes. So because I do this as like part of my living, I'm not in the National Novel Writing Month flow of work. I'm just doing my own flow of work for my own business since I write year round. But I'm really happy to have people who are jumping into the craft in November and seeing what they can do and learning all the lessons there. You learn a lot of lessons just by doing it. So let's take a look at the chat. Jared says he hasn't heard people talk about it much. I think, it's definitely a good thing for young people to look at because young people very rarely stretch their creative muscles. Most often young people get kind of, I don't know, you get kind of, at school, you're kind of shuffled through things where you're not really being creative. You're just kind of completing assignments, and you don't really have a blank canvas to work with. So I think for young people, it's a great idea to just try for November to see what they can write, because it will expand your mind in whole new ways, forcing yourself to imagine new things. Rusty says he could slam out 50,000 words a month, but at that speed, it'd probably take me another to do proofreading and error correction. Yeah. So that's the other thing too, is the faster you write, the more errors you have. And if, some people, it's very difficult to type quickly and error-free. That's probably why I have more typos than a lot of people, as far as when people get the rough drafts or whatever out, or even the revised versions. It's just because I go really quickly, I know exactly what I'm writing, and I bash it out pretty quick in a lot of cases. So, what should a cover cost for a self-published novel? I'm using DeviantArt for such things. Great question from Attempt to Review, and this is it varies highly. So it really depends on the quality of cover, the kind of cover you're trying to get, what you're going to do with the cover itself, and what you're asking the artist to do, and what your genre is and things like that, and as well as where you're at in your writing career. So if it's your first book, don't spend a lot of money, simply because you don't want to dump a bunch of money into what's probably going to end up being one of your worst products. This is no offense to anybody that is excited about putting out their first book. It's like, when I say it's your worst product, it will be it'll be the worst compared to things that you do after that, because you get better at your craft the more you do it. So it's like always the first album from a band usually sucks, or it doesn't suck, but it's significantly lower in quality for like across the board than what they do after that, because they get better at their craft. And it's the same thing with writers, Stephen King's first published book was not his first book he wrote. The first book he wrote, I think, was like The Gunslinger. And it required a lot of revisions even to publish the first time around, I think. So the first book you write, it's probably just not going to be nearly as good as what you do afterwards. So you don't want to dump like $1,000 into a cover. I would say you can get a pre-made book cover. If you don't know what I mean by pre-made, there's sites like 99 Designs, like Rocking Book Covers. There's a bunch of different sites that have pre-made book covers that fit a genre. And a lot of times you'll see it and be like, that could work for my book, and you pay $50 to $100 for it. And I think that's very appropriate for your first book. $50 to $100, $150 at most, I would say. And then you can go ahead and publish your book with a properly designed cover. Now, these aren't the slickest designs. There's not going to be as much design in a $50 cover as there is in something like this. If I were to design this cover for someone else, I'd charge like several $100s probably, because there's a lot of design work that goes into this. And it's not just the time I spend in Photoshop, because I actually didn't spend that much time in Photoshop. I just know what I'm doing, and I knew what kind of design I wanted to execute for this book. But to get something that where somebody actually knows what they're doing, it's going to cost money. Now, you can do it yourself. You can train yourself to do book cover design, which I did. But it's, again, you have to think about, like, what's the value to me? Do I want to spend a bunch of hours trying to do a good book cover design and learning how to do that as like a future investment? That was what I did at one point. Or do I just want to pay someone $50 to $100? So $50 to $100, $150 at most for a pre-made book cover is good. If you're going to have a book cover custom designed for your first book, I probably would try to not spend more than $200 or $300 on a design. And if you can, you want that design to include a paperback wrap. So this one, it's not just the front, it goes all the way around the back, right? The image wraps around. Okay, so if you want an actual paperback wrap, that's more design elements. It's going to cost you a little bit more money. The other thing about designing a paperback, or just going with a designer in general, is that updating the cover text may be difficult. You always want to make sure you get the Photoshop file. So at the very least, if you don't even have Photoshop, you can open it with something like GIMP maybe and change it, or get a friend to alter the text for you in Photoshop pretty quickly. So I'd say $50 to $150 for pre-made, and then $200 to $300 for a designed one. Now it goes, sky's the limit. You can get a designed Photoshop cover that's $1,500 by some of the best artists in the business, and it's not a bad investment. If you're going to spend your money on anything, cover is not a bad investment. But $1,500 on a cover is a lot of money if you've never written a book, and chances are that great book cover will not just automatically generate you sales. There's a ton of great book covers out there. So I would say save the money for a little bit later book if you're going to. If you're going to commission a painting, expect to spend at least, $500 plus to have one known. Now, if you're going to license an image off of DeviantArt, like Attempt Review says, then that can be highly variable. It could be $50 to $300, right? To license the image, and then you're going to have a designer put the text on it, or you figure out how to put the text on it. There's a lot more that goes into designing text than a lot of people realize. I've done some content on it. So hopefully that's some good rules of thumb for you. All right, let's keep going. These are all great questions that have to do with this. So I'm okay putting off the lecture a little bit and not leading too much with the lecture. Let's see here. Diversity in Comics says he's gotten pro comics. Yeah, that's John. What's up, John? From $20 all the way up to $1,000. You can spend even more than that, just depending on what you want. And I think for this is I'll give you a couple other little rules of thumb. If you're in the fantasy genre, paintings are okay, but they're way expensive, especially to have a new one done. If you are not in the fantasy genre, I would say avoid illustrated covers in general. So that's pretty much any other genre that's not in the fantasy genres, that area of fantasy, I would avoid illustrated covers. They usually end up looking amateur or looking out of place in the genre. You want a photorealistic cover for most genres, or if you're in like nonfiction, nonfiction design is its own thing, which I don't have time to get into, and I'm not really an expert on because I don't really do nonfiction books. I do fiction books. But yeah, I would avoid illustrated covers for anything outside of fantasy. Just a rule of thumb. It could work, but I would probably avoid it. I've just discovered a band called Paladine. I think you might like them. Okay. In the context of your stories, how do you define magic? Magic is anything that doesn't adhere to our own normal understanding of physics. That's magic. So in a sci-fi story, the technology is really magic. I know we call it technology, but it functions like magic. Hopefully that makes sense. Speaking of black and white art, what are your thoughts on Gustave Doré? You know what? I'm going to have to look something up. He's... Okay, yes, all right. I like Gustave Doré's art a lot. I actually have seen so much of his art on black metal covers, right? Emperor used one of his drawings for their very first, called Death on the Pale Horse, for the very first album. You see it as it's almost Watain used a takeoff of it, of one of him for one of their covers. Very, very, very interesting black and white art. Jesse is capable of doing that art, by the way. But man, that old style of illustration, there was so much to it. It was so cool to see those things. If you ever find old books from the 19th century, which are still around, if you hunt, you can find them. Yeah, I've seen so much of his art over the years, and it's always has like a strong emotion to it. Fills you with dread and fear. Yeah, I do love the art. Oh, okay, let's keep going. Let's see here. And by the way, if you want to ask a question, make sure you put David Stewart, not. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you're talking to each other. There's a similar new pulp magazine called Cersova. Yeah, it's good. I think there's another issue coming out. So definitely check that one out too. I don't have a link on me right now. I think they finished their recent crowdfunding, so I have to wait for issue 3. And they actually, by the way, pay you for their stories if you submit to them. Their submissions are closed for the next issue. I think they just closed them, but they will pay not a pro rate, but it's a good rate. It's money, right? You're getting paid, so that's great. I think I'll work on the werewolf idea I had last week. Yeah, I like werewolves. Werewolves are fun. Speaking of that flash fiction horror story, it's not really flash fiction. At this point. Now I turned it into a novella. And it wouldn't be my first horror novel. That's Voices of the Void, which you can get for 99 cents on Amazon. Sci-fi horror, but it's definitely horror. What genre would you say a story that takes place in a fantasy setting with magic, but ultimately is a character drama with very little action is? Fantasy. be fantasy or high fantasy. That's how it is, right? The genre of fantasy is not defined so much by the execution of the story, like some genres, like mystery, is defined by its execution, but it's definitely defined by its setting elements primarily. Let's see here. In your last stream, you said that The Mandalorian won't be good without using any qualifiers such as probably. Why are you certain that it won't be good when you liked Solo? I said Solo was okay. I didn't necessarily like Solo. I liked it for what it was. I don't think it will be good because Disney's making it. I'm not going to watch it. I don't know if I said it wouldn't be good, but I said I wasn't going to watch it. I don't watch TV, and I'm not going to watch a TV show. I'm not going to watch a Disney Star Wars TV show. I'm just not going to do it. It's not worth my time. I might make money like making clickbait content on it. So if you guys want me to make clickbait content on it, I can do that. You know, I make clickbait content, get all those clicks. You know, if people want that, if you really want me to talk about The Mandalorian, I can watch it and talk about it. But I don't really want to watch it. I have zero interest in it. I really have zero interest in episode 9, other than the interest of having conversations with people who I've had conversations with over the past 3 years with Star Wars. I'm only really interested in it to talk to my friends about it, you know, talk to people on YouTube about it. I'm more interested in the meta of it than it itself. I could really not care any less. I couldn't care any less, I should say, about the conclusion of that story. What would you pair with green to represent a necromancer on a cover? Probably just gray. You can do green and purple. Green and purple is really strong. And green and purple or green and gray. If you desaturate the purple, it comes across okay. Green and blue is more, it's just a different emotion. But yeah, green and gray or green and purple. Green tends to think of forests and adventure. So if you have a necromancer, I might do like just gray and purple even, or like gray, maybe like a ochre green, like a very yellowish green. And it's all color art. I mean, it's hard to define how colors get to emotions, and this is kind of flippy floppity flu stuff, right? I used green and purple just so you know what green and purple looks like. Where's my album? This is what green and purple looks like, right? So green and purple has a super strong contrast, as you can see. It feels very fantastical. It's a very fantastical combination of colors. You almost never see pink and purple in nature. It's very striking. So for a necromancer, when you want it to seem creepy, I tend to think very desaturated and probably want most of it to be without a big color. Thank you, John. City of Silver art looks great. I appreciate that. I'm getting better at what I do. Also, the necromancer is the protagonist. Cool. Your tutorials on do-it-yourself book cover design has inspired me to give it a shot. Cool. Really enjoyed writing my book, especially since it's a Western. I like Westerns too. Yeah. I haven't written any Westerns. That might be something down the line. I really love the City of Silver art, but not as beautiful and perfect as Water of Awakening. The art is an image by Karen Byatt, who I decided I really wanted to do something by him, but I couldn't afford to commission something new, so we found an older image he did that he's like, no one's using this, let's do this one. He did the Twilight Force cover art, and it was like so cool to see it. It was just perfect. So I had to do something by him. And I'll probably commission new covers from him in the future at some point, just because I really love his art and it's very inspiring to me. Other people really love it too. They have that same feeling towards it. Illustrated covers work great for fantasy if they're good quality. If they're muted paintings, they don't look so good, especially on Amazon. But what I like about this painting, it already has pretty striking colors, and I did a little photoshopping with it to really pop it up and make the contrast a little tighter, to make it really stand out online. But there's a significant amount of detail and contrast with the shadows, whereas a lot of people who come from traditional painting backgrounds will not paint with quite enough contrast for you to use it as an effective book cover. You know what I mean? You know what I mean when you see it. When you see a painted cover that's just everything's kind of muted, like you're looking at some cover from like the 50s. And if you're going for that like pulpy 50s look, that's fine. I'll probably do that for covers too, but it doesn't always fit into the modern genres. You want them pretty bright, pretty high contrast. I know John's in the chat. If you look at John's covers, the new ones for Diversified, I'll probably bring them up here. Or not Diversified. Justified. Let's look it up. Here, we'll pop it open. Let's take a look at this cover art. Because this is a great cover. John got a great cover for this one. So I'm going to just talk about some of the color space for it. So yeah, here's the color space here. And this is what the cover looks like kind of up close. First of all, the first thing you're going to notice is there's contrast. It goes from black. There's a lot of black on this page. Black with really bright colors. Now, what we perceive of as bright colors are not necessarily bright colors. You notice this is actually white. This is actually white. All of the edges of this Templar are white, and the reflections are white. That's going to be white paper that it's printed on. And then the text, the great choice of font for the text is very bright. But if you just look at the image, you see that things go from black to white very quickly. That's a high contrast. If this was more muted, if it went from gray to lighter gray, which is the way most painters paint on a canvas, or when you look at it on a wall in a brightly lit room, it's not going to look as good in the digital space, and frankly, it just won't look as good on a paperback cover. You still want it to pop in a physical form. So that dark cover of City of Silver looks really great online, but it looks great when you hold it in your hands too. It doesn't lose its flavor simply because you're looking at it as a physical book. Whereas I think the more traditional paintings tend to lose some of that oomph when you put them in the digital space. So this high contrast book cover really, really does pop. It catches the eye. What's great about it is you could see it as a smaller image, like a thumbnail, and it's gonna still look great. You know, you're gonna look at it and be like, whoa, this looks like a dude with a lightsaber and planets. And even though most of this image is black, like it's 80% black, the rest of it, you know, it's like 80% black. No, that's it. It's 75% black, 10% white. Like the middle of the lightsaber is actually white, and the rest of it is colors, like 5% colors. That's how you know you're in a great contrast space. Just some rules of thumb there. Haven't seen a movie in the theater since TLJ, Last Jedi. Even the movies I do want to see, the movie broke me and made me understand a fundamental problem with Hollywood that I can't deal with. Yeah, I'm always way behind in the comments because I'm go through them in order. Sorry about that, John. Thank you for buying the book, John. I appreciate that. Getting over a cold. Yeah, I'm coming down with a cold. And like the baby has a cold, and it's not. My wife's taking the day off tomorrow, so it's going to be great. Romantic novels get illustrated covers too. Yeah, you can, but I actually would probably do Photoshop just because it's cheaper. I would Photoshop the romance cover because I could do it a lot cheaper. So if I ever write romance, which I won't, you won't know, you might not know, because I'll probably write it under like a pseudonym. But I would totally put a hot dude with abs. I probably wouldn't have a painting cover. You could do them for romance, but I personally wouldn't spend the money in 2019. I'd just do like a Photoshop cover. What's your opinion on books being made into movies? Some seem to turn out well, but I feel as if film can't properly capture the wonder some books have. So you're comparing a medium that has strict limits, which is the film medium, with one that doesn't have a strict limits, which is the book medium. So when you write a book, it could be as long as you need it to be. When you make a movie, there's actually some pretty hard limits on how long a movie you can make to actually get it in theaters. You know, you can't make a 6-hour movie. If you do, you have to split it up into several parts. So that's a problem. And this is why usually people say the book is better than the movie, is because the book contains all of the important elements to communicate the story correctly. Whereas the movie, you have to make a bunch of compromises usually to fit in something that's much bigger than what the movie would allow. And keep in mind that because a movie is passive, because you're just watching images come at you, the pacing is so much more important. You have to, if you're a filmmaker, maintain a really solid pacing, or you'll bore the audience, which is not good. So if you included all of those story details which made sense to a reader and which weren't obtrusive to a reader, were easy to read, were interesting to read, if you included all of those details, then it would make the movie possibly very boring. And so that's something you have to keep track with too. Movies are their own medium, and so adaptations are always, to me, you're always losing something when you go to a different medium, especially when you're going from a novel to a movie. But that doesn't mean the movies are bad. It's okay to adapt them. I know Hollywood adapts them because they just don't have any ideas of their own. So if Hollywood wanted to pay me money to turn one of my books into a movie, they are welcome to do that. I will gladly take money. John's cover's great also. Yeah, Jared, it is. As long as painted fantasy covers go, few come close to James Gurney's work. Yeah. Michael Whalen, I'm still a huge fan of Michael Whalen's art. He just captures the essence of things in such a great way. Of course, Dan Francetta, who did all the Conan covers in like the 60s and stuff. Amazing. I previously commented on your video Vampire Hunter D. I loved it, and I really hope you do more on the classic manga. Would you consider doing in-depth reviews of the stories? Yeah. So I was talking to another YouTuber. I was on his podcast the other day. I don't know when that's going to come out. I really want to talk more about like these Japanese novels, if I can get my hands on like Vampire Hunter D. I have like the first. I don't have all of them. I stopped buying them at some point, not because like I didn't like them, but because there was no more books to buy. So I'll probably talk about this. I started rereading this one, and actually, despite the problems I have with the translation approach in it, it's a really good story, and the plot's great, and I actually like the prose, and I like the way, Hideyuki Kikuchi actually describes things. I like the art by Yoshitaka Amano, who did all the Final Fantasy art. This is earlier art by him from the 80s. But very striking, this classic black and white art with no grays. It's great. So I'll probably talk more about that. A couple mangas I kind of want to talk about, like Blade of the Immortal, because we were talking about Berserk. So we'll probably talk about Blade of the Immortal. Great manga. And where's another one? This one I hadn't read. But Jesse White, I think, originally recommended this to me. Lone Wolf and Cub. So we'll talk about this one. This is the first omnibus. By the way, this is when you look at these manga, just manga in general, you're aware of just like how much money gets lost with American graphic novel work sometimes. You're paying $25 for like a floppy when this was $11 for 800 pages of just great manga. I mean, like, and the paper's good too. It's not like crappy paper. It's really good paper for what it is. So, I mean, the value here is insane. Like manga, you can get so much graphic novel value. I think this was $12 too when I bought this, and it's great. Great stuff. So, Lone Wolf and Cub. I actually do recommend this one. Great samurai manga. I'll talk more about that one. I love samurai stories. I wrote one. You can get my samurai story. Where is it? Muramasa Blood Drinker. Here it is. So you can get that one on Amazon. I think it's $2.99 for the ebook. Pretty cheap. Okay. City of Silver is terrific. Can you talk about how you balance world building and pacing in a story like that? If you read it, I really appreciate that. I would love it if you would just like drop a review at some point and just say what you liked about it. I need reviews really bad for that so that I can get to work on the series and start selling the series. Reviews are like if you ever read a book from an author, particularly an indie author, dropping a review is just the best way to help. Even if they have a ton of reviews, like, John's book has 42 reviews. Still, dropping a review is huge because those newer reviews, those go up to the top. The newer reviews will kind of end up at the top after a while. So people can, it really helps to have newer reviews for people to come in and see what's up. And you can see like people really like this first book a lot and people like this series a lot. So even though there's 42 reviews, it's a really helpful thing to do it. Same thing with if I have a book that has like 20 or 30 reviews or something, it's really helpful to have those bigger reviews. That's part of the social proof of selling a book. And I'll talk about that maybe some other time. But you need a couple things to sell a book. Cover, obviously, a good title that that goes into your genre, a great blurb that sells people on the story, and finally the social proof that other people like the story as well. That's what's going to convert somebody who sees that thumbnail of your cover from a person who clicks it into a person who buys the book and reads it, which is what you want. You want to attract people who want to read your book. That's the main thing. You don't want to sell your book to people who don't want to read it. In general, you don't want to, because then they'll be upset that they read a book they don't like. John says he likes Michael Whaling. I do too. Stopped watching TV years ago. Yeah, I stopped watching TV years ago too. I go to theaters every so often. I watch your vids, but I'm not there yet like a lot of the other viewers. I need some beginner advice from a human writer like you and not the droid like academic. That's not... I'm just going to delete that because I don't want that email address there. So I'm going to delete that email address. I don't want that email address in the chat. Night of the Hunter, I'm gonna have a little lecture on that. Just let me get through the chat. Night of the Hunter, starring Robert Mitchum, is both an extraordinarily faithful adaptation of the book and a great movie in its own right. To rank it as the book equal in quality. Sometimes the movie's actually better than the book. I actually think Fight Club the movie's better than Fight Club the book. It's not that Fight Club the book is bad, but the movie's really good. What do you think about collecting physical items? Do you ever regret buying things because you only read them one time? I never regret buying them if I only read them one time, because I can always give the book away to someone who wants to read it, or sell it to a used bookstore and get a book that I do want to read instead. So I never feel bad. And generally, if I've had a book for several years and I've only read it one time, I get rid of it. And if I've had a book for several years and I've read it twice, then I know that I need to keep it. Or if I often think about reading it again. I come across books that I'm like, oh yeah, I remember reading this. I'm like, but I'm never going to read it again. Goes into the donate pile, or, you sell it to the used bookstore. I would like to do more videos on manga, commenting. Yeah, I do. Have you read Justified? I haven't read it yet. I'm a bad dude who haven't read it. So for me, I can't leave Amazon reviews because I'm an author, but I could happily do more content on it. And I've had John on to talk about these books, and so we'll probably do more talk about it as it is. I haven't read it yet. How do you feel about Super Honest? I read First Steam and Country, which is his first steampunk book. I didn't read the sequels yet. Again, I'm not the best guy in the world to read tons of stuff, but it's good. So I like First Steam and Country a lot for young adult steampunk stuff. It's very exciting, very fun. How do you feel about super honest reviews that are a bit critical? Does it really hurt authors, or do they like the feedback? So I will just tell you honestly, it doesn't really affect me because I don't write for the authors. I mostly want the reviews there for other readers to get something out of them. I don't really use them as feedback. Other people may think of that differently. To me, it doesn't really matter. I am pursuing the product that I want in my mind, and I'm pursuing a product that I hope readers will like as well. But if there's somebody who doesn't like it, it's not like I'm going to rewrite the book for them. It's not like, it's not like that affects anything. It has zero effect on me looking at the book. I might take it. It might be some piece of information for the future, for like a future book. Like if somebody says, hey, there was a bunch of typos, and I look and there's like 3 typos in it. I'm like, okay, there needs to be 0 typos, So for the future, if I want to avoid losing a star, I need to have 0 typos, which is really hard. It's really hard to launch a book with 0 typos, with 0 people helping you do anything. It's just tough. I have to do a lot of self-proofreading because no one else will do it. And that's just how it is. I'll post one tonight. It's very concise and thoughtfully crafted. Good work. Thank you. I was going for 310 to Yuma, but fantasy. And this is actually like the 3rd or 4th revision I've done of that part of the story. And as I get further into the next books, there's less revision that has to be done. The second one, there's all kinds of stuff I got to do, but there's some stuff that I'm so excited to put out there. There's some amazingly fun scenes that I can't wait to publish. There's this great jailbreak that I have, which is a lot of fun. And has a lot of comedy, little comedy elements to it that I have a lot of love for, and just a great. It's pirates. The second book is all pirates. Pirates are so fun. So I'm really looking forward to putting it out, just because I think pirates are just tons of fun to write, tons of fun to read. So this, the first one's kind of 3 Chin to Yuma, but fantasy. Second one's going to be pirates, but fantasy, I guess. Pirates. Conan the Pirate. So that'll be fun. It's so much easier to read manga books digitally than physically. But like with games, I much prefer to own something. Now, see, I feel the opposite. I feel like with manga, I really want it physical. Like it just has a different effect on the page. But I understand if you want to read it digitally, and luckily you can make that choice for yourself because there's so many different options for how to consume manga or to consume comics. You could get the digital version of pretty much every modern comic. You can get it as a PDF or through what's it called? There's an app for reading it, but it doesn't quite look right. And to see the arrangement, I like to see the full page. So if I'm going to read it digitally, I like to do it on the PC where I can see the full page and the way the panels are laid out. That's something that really that I really like. And I do like to see the full pages. Now this one has a little bit of some gutter issues, but otherwise it's pretty good. And that's another problem with like physical editions is if something's off with the printing, it can affect the quality. But I much like it in the paper. That's me. Lone Wolf and Cub is a classic masterpiece. Check out the manga series called Vagabond. I'll check it out. The other one I want to read is called Vinland Saga. I haven't read it yet. I'll probably read that one soon because it's manga. It's Japanese manga, but Vikings. How is that not cool? I can't wait to read it. The film version of Jaws is better than the book. I didn't know there was a book. I'll be honest. Do you keep a collection of books that you want your children to read as they grow up? Yes, I do. I actually do. What's your advice regarding historical research for setting? I've gotten stuck researching 19th century nautical life for my story, and I'm not confident it's accurate enough. So I've got the same kind of problem, right? Like there's so much detail that goes into a sailing ship, and I don't know how to sail a ship because I live in 21st century America. So, I would say stick to the way that a sailing ship works matters less than the character drama. So stick to that. Notice how they never talk about how starships work in Star Wars. Because that's not what it doesn't matter. What matters is what the characters do. So try to stick to that. Just avoid. I had to learn this, right? I did all this research on sailing vessels, and I'm writing in these details, and I realize I'm writing like Moby Dick. And if you ever read Moby Dick, there's way too much detail on like sailing vessels. So I started cutting some of that and just focusing on the dialogue and the action. The drama. Crusader, greetings, Dave. Just want to say I'm stoked to be able to catch the stream for once. I'm so glad to have you. Enjoying a nice cigar and listening to you is great. I stopped smoking cigars. I only smoke my pipe now, and I rarely smoke it. But I don't know. I'm glad you're doing something that is an aesthetic experience. We lose our aesthetic experiences, I feel like, in the modern world. Like a cigarette versus a cigar. A cigar is an aesthetic experience. A cigarette is like, I need my fix. I just need a smoke. You should take this opportunity of NaNoWriMo and write your first light novel, or should I say the first American light novel? Good idea. Unfortunately, the best light novel name, Arise, middle-aged businessman arise in another world, has already been taken. This would be my autobiography. What tips do you have for avoiding plot holes? Plan in advance. That's the best tip I can give. Do you often find that new authors tend to limit their imagination for no reason? Yes. Yeah, they tend to dial themselves in too much because they're afraid of judgment, but that's natural. You just write what you feel and then be okay editing it later. Do you think movies should go back to the time when they were much longer and take intermissions between showing them? It's not up to me. I think for viewing at home, because I think we're shifting more towards viewing at home. Series is like what they do on Netflix, like Game of Thrones, is probably going to be the future. I think 6-hour movies is like a mini-series. I think mini-series will probably be something that'll do that. Instead of a 4 to 5 hour long movie, you'll have a 6-episode mini-series. Oh, Vinland Saga is currently airing its anime adaptation. It's about 16 episodes. Very intense if you're looking for something new to watch. Very cool idea. I didn't know that. What are your thoughts on the health risks of smoking? I think it's dose dependent. highly dose dependent, but there are health risks to doing anything, right? So what I mean by that is a person who smokes habitually, it's orders of magnitude higher, but there's not zero risk if you smoke lightly. Don't start thinking that. Where do you get your stock images for your covers again? I get them off Adobe Stock because I have a plan with them, and I get a deal on that plan because I use their Creative Cloud stuff for all my other business stuff. Shutterstock is probably the most affordable. 123RF is also very affordable. Adobe Stock is a little bit more expensive per image, if I remember correctly, and they don't really let you just buy like one image at a time, which is what a lot of people want to do. I have a plan because you got to think I'm using thumbnails for videos, articles, books. I'm using it for everything. In the book of Jaws, Quint was quite a bit like Ahab. Okay. All right. Let me talk about NaNoWriMo. Little mini lecture. Here's how you write a book. Okay. This is how you write a book in the most condensed and concise, accurate way that I can tell you how to write a book. So the first thing you have to know is there's four steps to creating a book: planning, drafting, revision, publication. NaNoWriMo just focuses on the drafting phase, and therein lies the first mistake. Planning is probably a very good step that you shouldn't skip. If you just jump into writing prose and dialogue without an idea of what the story is or where it's going, you're going to find yourself lost, and you're going to find yourself not knowing what happens next, and you're going to lose confidence in what you're doing. If you plan out the story and you have a plan, you know where it's going, the drafting phase is much easier and it's much quicker. When you sit down at your keyboard and you know exactly what you're going to write for the day, the book writes itself almost. It writes itself very quickly, and it can also be a joyful experience because you're actualizing this thing that you've envisioned. So if you envision the story and its complete complexity and write that vision down into a plan, before you write the novel, it's like you're just achieving your goals. It's not even work, it's joy. So don't skip the planning phase. And that's really what I'm going to focus on for writing a book. The drafting phase really is going to come down to making sure you are making constant and consistent progress towards finishing the book, that you are writing through your plot accurately and well. We're not going to talk about revision and publication. Those are different processes entirely. National Novel Writing Month just focuses on the drafting phase. So let's go back to the planning phase. Here's what you need to do to plan a novel. First thing you're going to decide is the setting. Next thing, characters. Last thing, plot. And I'm going to give you some really easy paint by numbers things to do for those. First of all, for setting, you're going to make a choice of 3 different categories. You're going to set it in the past, you're going to set it in the present, or you are going to set it in the future. Each of those is going to correspond to different parts of genres. If you already know what genre you want to write in, it's going to fit into one of these, right? Past is going to be historical fiction or most fantasy. Lord of the Rings is set in the past. I know you're like, but it's a fantasy world. It's not our world. Of course not. But it's technologically in the past. It's societally in the past. It is medieval fantasy, in essence. So if you're writing medieval fantasy, you're writing medieval plus something. And the second thing you have to decide is the plus something. So past, present. If you're writing a detective novel, is it in the present or is it in the past? Is it like a noir novel or is it today novel? Future is going to be sci-fi. And the reality is if you look at something like Star Wars, you could write a Star Wars fan fiction novel as long as you remove all of the proper nouns from Star Wars and don't talk about the Force as the Force. It's pretty much a generic science fantasy space opera setting, right? You can have a magic that's like the Force. You can have magic users. Mass Effect has magic, right? You can have all of those elements as long as you remove the proper nouns. You're in a more or less a generic space opera setting. So past, present, future. Next thing you're going to decide is magic or no magic. This sounds weird because some genres, of course, no magic. But for fantasy, probably going to have magic. For historical fiction, no magic. But maybe you are going to have magic. Maybe you're going to write something like Mother of Kings by Poul Anderson that crosses these boundary lines between historical fiction and fantasy, becomes a true historical fantasy, mythological fantasy even. Very interesting book, by the way. And from a great writer, a writer who more people should read. So magic or no magic. If it's set in today, if you're doing urban fantasy, it's going to be today, but magic, right? If you're doing future, Star Wars is future with magic, right? So you're going to make those decisions. That's going to be your world building. You don't need to do too much more world building than that, because you find that the more you look at all of these different books, you're looking at variations on the genre idea of past with magic, present with magic, future with magic, or past without, without. So those are the main decisions you need to make. That's going to determine 90%. If you think of something original that goes into that, of course, go ahead and use that. If you're like, hey, it's like the past, but it's like Clockpunk, everything is super complicated clock gears. All right, there you go. Characters. Here's a really easy way to set up your characters. You're going to have primary characters. You're going to have static characters. Static characters are those that revolve around the story. They don't really change. They're just there to serve a purpose. Your primary characters are your characters that actually get lots of action, lots of dialogue. They have character arcs. They are acting out the plot in a significant way. Here's your characters that you're going to have. You're going to have a main character that's your protagonist. Your protagonist can be any archetype that you want. He could be an everyman. Everyman is probably what I recommend for most people because that's just a really relatable character type. He could be a bad boy. He could be anything. You're going to have a main character. You're going to have a best friend. You're going to have a love interest, and you're going to have an antagonist. You're going to have a villain. So you're going to have main character, you're going to have best friend, love interest, and antagonist. And I should actually order this different. Main character, love interest, best friend, antagonist. And those three protagonist characters, the three good guys, each of them corresponds to a different plot. The A plot is the goals of the main character. The B plot is the romance between the main character and the love interest. The C plot is the best friend helping the main character towards the end of the book. And so ABC plot, 3 main plot points as well as we move into plot. And then the antagonist is just the one trying to stop them. Really easy way to think of how this fits in almost any movie you could watch or book. You could watch Conan the Barbarian. You have Conan as the main character. His love interest, Valeria. You have the best friend, Subutai, and you have the antagonist, Thulsa Go to Harry Potter. You have Harry Potter, main character, love interest. This is why so many people, you think it's Hermione initially, but because they're kids, it doesn't really pan out that way as the thing goes on. She's the girl character, and then best friend Ron, and then antagonist would be actually Malfoy for most of the characters. Not actually Voldemort. Voldemort comes later, but it's really Malfoy's the antagonist, when you think about it. So very simple. Star Wars, it's Luke Skywalker, main character. Leia, love interest. Even though they don't get together, it becomes Han and Leia in the first movie. That's how it definitely is. Best friend Han Solo, and then antagonist Darth Vader. Okay. You don't need to, you can add more characters to that, like a helper, Paragon, like an Obi-Wan kind of character if you want, but it's not necessary. Those are the ones you're going to think of. Lastly, plot. Your plot doesn't need to be that complicated. Plot is just event sequence. So if you have an event sequence in mind, just write it down and just write down this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. You don't have to think about act structures at all if you don't want to. But I'll give you a really easy way to think about it, is that there's going to be what people call exposition. Exposition is just the beginning of the story. It's the introduction of the conflict and the main plot goal. So you want to set up the main plot goal, preferably in the first chapter, and maybe even on the first page if you can manage it. The main plot goal is what you want to happen, the tension which must be resolved. We have to blow up the Death Star. We got to throw the ring into Mount Doom. That's the plot goal. So you want to set that up. That's the first thing you're going to do. And you're going to have the characters do that. So in Star Wars, you have Darth Vader attacking a ship. So you see the antagonist trying to catch some plans, trying to find the Death Star plans. You're going to see this over and over again in movies and books. This is how it's set up. In The Hobbit, the plot goal is we got to get to Smaug's lair. That's the first thing they do in the first chapter, is decide they're going to go on an adventure and then go on it. The next thing that you want to happen is you want to have the protagonist be forced into the plot. He has to do something, right? So the antagonist harms him somehow that makes him have that plot goal or take action in that. If you were looking at like a hero adventure or a hero with 1,000 faces kind of story, it'd be the call to adventure. But it doesn't have to be that. It could be something like really, really simple. Like the antagonist kidnaps the girlfriend or something, double dragon, doesn't matter. Then you're going to have a middle act, which is just going to be planning to beat the bad guy. You form a plan to achieve the goal. Then you're going to have, as your second big plot point, the plan fails. It doesn't work. So that's the first big battle. Then the characters have to regroup and then come up with a new plan that's going to think about something outside the box as a way to come up with a plan to defeat the villain. That's a really basic plot. That's an A story. Now, B story, C story, let me talk about those real quick. B story is just romance. That's going to happen in the margins mostly. It's going to happen in the interactions between the protagonist and the love interest, or the love interest and maybe the best friend, if that's where the love story is. Usually you want the protagonist to have some sort of love story rather than have like a Han Leia thing. Han Leia works fine in the second movie, but it's not really there in the first movie for good reason. So that's what you want to have for your B story. That's going to mostly happen in the margins. You want them to have some sort of romantic interest and then have that romantic interest be threatened at some point in the story by something. Like the protagonist makes a decision which offends the love interest, or she feels betrayed by one of his decisions, and then they have to repair the relationship. Basic romance stuff. C story is the best friend story. That's usually going to come into play after you have this battle where you fail. Your plan fails, and now you think everything's in ruins and you don't know how to repair it. And so the best friend comes up with an idea. Hey, what if we do this? I will grow and help you. So his growth happens in that last act. Then they execute the plan to beat the bad guy, blow up the Death Star, do whatever, throw the ring into Mount Doom. That's your plot. Really basic plot. Okay, so you have an exposition of the conflict. The hero engages in the conflict. You plan. The plan fails. Come up with a new plan. That plan succeeds. There's your plot. Okay. And I'm not going to go into mystery plots. If you're writing mystery, that one's not going to work. But that's going to work for most of your pulp writing. Let's see here. Not all movies were long back then. There were a lot of movies in the 1920s to 40s that were only about an hour long. Yeah, used to go to the theater and you could see double features, matinees. You might see 4 or 5 things. A lot of the cartoons were before feature length stuff. So yeah, you had a lot of different lengths back in the day. Do you know the art of Stephen Martineri? I'm gonna Google him because I'm guessing I don't. I haven't seen most of this. There's a painting of the Millennium Falcon, which looks kind of cool. And most of this seems kind of unfamiliar to me. I've probably seen it before, but I'm just not familiar with him as an artist. Sorry. Do you think that someone could legally get away with writing a story about a superhero team featuring General USA, Steel Guy, Brown Recluse, Eagle Sight, and the Unbelievable Bulk? If it is clearly parody, for sure. If it's not clearly parody, I don't know, you might have issues. Certainly, if they act exactly like a trademark character, there might be issues. I always plan out an outline for whatever story I write, regardless if it's a book or a script, so I know where I want the story and characters to go. Yeah, I do that too. On the topic of writing a story with a historical setting, I notice a lot of movies and books that the characters don't accurately represent the time period that they're supposed to be from. Such as having beliefs or attitudes that people from that time would not have. Yes, I've noticed this as well. You have samurai that are remorseful for like the way that the society is organized in the Edo period. It's like, probably wouldn't happen. Not in the way that we tend to do it. We tend to impress our own sensibilities on it. Now, here's the thing though, right? You're writing it for modern viewers, so to have it be completely historically accurate, it might seem very alien. And there might be a fog of unrelatability there. So I don't know. There might be something that you have to kind of tread. Filmmakers might be afraid of making something just focusing on historical accuracy because they're afraid of boring the audience, or the audience not understanding what people are saying or doing or why they're doing a certain thing. That's possible. So yeah, I mean, a great example is actually Braveheart, which is not historically accurate on like any level. Braveheart, the events are all wrong. Like the attitudes are wrong. The dress is wrong. Everything's wrong in Braveheart. William Wallace is wearing a backwards belted plaid, not a kilt, but belted plaid is where you belt the plaid on and you flip it over your shoulder and tie it. And now wasn't really a thing, I think, until like the 14th or 15th century. I think really until the 15th century, maybe even the 16th. So it's like it'd be like him wearing a backward tuxedo. It's just like completely out of time. And they're all wearing it backwards. And then he has his Zweihander, he has his two-handed claymore sword. That two-handed swords like that weren't a thing in the 13th century. They just weren't, right? That's like a 15th century sword. Everybody from the Scottish Highlands is completely dirty all the time, wearing kilts, nothing but kilts. It's really funny, actually. It's a great one. I think it's actually a pretty well-made movie, but it's not historically accurate. If you look at it as like a fantasy movie, it's quite fun. What if there's no best friend or love interest? Then you're writing a story only, and it's going to be a shorter book. So if you want to shorter the book, cut out the subplots. Get rid of a best friend, get rid of that. Now, you don't have to do this. I'm just giving you something that's paint by numbers. You can obviously rebel against my suggestions as much as you want, and I recommend you do it. But that people who want a guide to go by, take that guide, add something to it that's unique, take something out of it that's unique, and see if that excites you. Don't do what I say. Use what I say as a starting point. Review submitted. Thank you for that, Mike Browning. I really appreciate that. Let me know if there's anything I can do for you. If you want like a free book or something, I'll send you one. My story has a plot along the lines of Alien or Predator. Ooh. And that there's no romance and the characters get whittled down to one. How does this affect the proper approach to take? You know what? You're going to do it. You already know what the story is, so you probably don't need that advice. Don't worry about trying to fit that into what I said at all. Do your thing. There's no love interest in this. There's no best friend. It's one man who the only other person he encounters cannot speak to him. Going deep into the depths of the mind to face the horror at the bottom. You don't have to have a love interest. In fact, there's no love interest in this. The love interest is only her husband, who she's already married to, in the beginning of the book, being so sick he can't talk, and she goes on a quest to save him. There's no love interest in this. There's not even really... Well, there's a best friend. There's a best friend, but he's a talking bird. There's a talking bird named Zolv, and that's really the best friend in this. And he's not really present through a whole lot of the book. For various reasons. So, you don't have to have it. Do your own thing. But it's a good thing to, if you're saying, well, how do I format a plot? What kind of plot do I use? That's a starting place. And if you sit there like, I don't want a best friend. It's like, cool, kick him out. Replace him with someone who betrays you. Or I want the best friend to betray the protagonist at the end. I'm like, do it. Do it. It's great. Oh, super chat. Thank you from Mothman Prophet. Any recommendations on comedic writing? Not straight comedy, but funny moments in dialogue while minimizing the risk of it falling flat. I'd say read it aloud. And if it feels good read aloud, like you'd be seeing it on a Monty Python skit, or it would work as a joke in a movie or something, then it probably will work in print. Not always, but you can't do slapstick that well. Most of your humor that's not from the dialogue directly when you're writing has to come from situational comedy. So situational comedy and funny dialogue. And you can't have things like slapstick work super well because it's not a live medium, so it just doesn't work. So situational comedy and good dialogue. Witty banter is fun. And then read it out loud will probably help. I already mentioned Braveheart on your channel before. Yeah, probably with how horribly historically inaccurate it is. I love the movie in one way. I'll tell you a story too. I've probably told this before, but so I saw Braveheart in theaters all those many years ago. And there's a part where the prince, like the son of King Edward, Longshanks, has what's very clear to everybody in the audience is a gay lover. And the gay lover says something to Longshanks that pisses him off, and he takes that gay lover and he throws him out the window and kills him. And now this is a notorious scene for being homophobic and stuff like that. But when I saw it in theaters, and I want to say I watched it when I was in Texas. I watched Heat when I was in Texas, I think, too. I want to say I was in Texas when I watched it. The audience cheered. They clapped and they hollered when they killed that guy. It happened, man. It happened. My Western is Robert Crusoe, yeah. Starship Grifters. Robert Crusoe. My Western is a typical revenge story where a bounty hunter goes after someone who killed his father, and along the way meets a woman who's the love interest, taking place in the 1880s. Perfect. Sounds like a great Western. And then, of course, he has to test his honor. There's so many great opportunities there. Do you like the banter from the 1930s screwball comedies? Not really. Personally, I don't. Not to say anything against, that, if that's your thing. It doesn't communicate well to me. The comedy that I like that I think has really held the test of time is actually stuff by stuff like The Importance of Being Earnest, and what's the other one? What's the other one he wrote that I really like? It's another Oscar Wilde play I'm thinking of that I just thought was so funny. The Importance of Being Earnest as a play really holds up as far as comedy. I have more stories about that. We had to read it as part of one of my graduate literature classes, and the teacher didn't quite realize it was a comedy and didn't understand that Importance of Being Earnest was a play on words. It was a very sobering moment where I realized that the professors who were teaching literature had no idea what they were talking about in many cases. I can't remember the name of the other play that I'm thinking of. Sorry. But yeah, I think that a lot of that stuff holds up. Shakespeare's a lot harder because I'm so separated by time. I honestly find Charles Dickens to be hysterical. Yeah, and like the Pickwick Papers. Moby Dick is shockingly modern with its bizarro humor. Dostoevsky has a great dry humor. His is mostly situational. That's true. How comedy's so variable. I mean, it's so bound up in the way our culture approaches things. You're always kind of interacting with the culture. It's so hard. It's so easy to lose comedy with time. I wonder what people 50 years from now will think of Monty Python. Are they going to think it's funny or not? I don't know. How are you doing? I'm doing great. Braveheart is amazing. Well, I'm doing okay. I think I'm coming down with a cold. I got some cough drops. Might have one. My throat's getting a little dry. I cheered too when he dropped his son's military advisor when the princess told him she had cucked him with Braveheart too. Yeah, it was a great thing. I'm having William Wallace's baby. That's not historical. I'm thinking of having my book have a few separate situations that the main character finds himself in as he wanders. He has to keep moving from place to place is a good idea. So that you're working with an Odyssey format. Odyssey format's great because each chapter or each act of the story can be a separate little story with its own conclusion, like Wandering Samurais, Lone Wolf and Cub. It's great. I love the idea of a knight errant, wandering gunslinger, wandering samurai. There's just something so appealing to that. I think that kind of lone wolf. Moving from place to place. Berserk is that way too. He has to keep moving or the demons will find him. There's so many great things that start with that. What do you think about Mark Twain's humor? I find Mark Twain very funny. I still find Mark Twain's humor to be quite funny. Although I think I can only find it funny in a lot of cases through a filter where I'm thinking about how that would be funny in the 19th century, versus reading something that's comedic today, which is funny in a more direct way. You remember laughing out loud on the subway while reading Moby Dick? I already think Monty Python is cringe boomer humor. It's the constant quotes and references that just destroyed it. A victim of its own success, yeah. I like Monty Python. Monty Python and the Holy Grail in particular is, I think, one of the great comedy movies. I don't know about boomer cringe. I mean, it's made by boomers, but um, as I've gotten on, I like the humor of the ending, in particular, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where it's just there's like a meta joke that they're all just LARPing out in the forest. Do you think the Odyssey plot structure risks alienating readers who are used to a 3-act structure? No. I personally don't, because it's very popular in literature. It's one of the oldest forms of plot. Thus, it's in the Odyssey. So I don't think you're going to alienate a lot of readers. I think it depends on how you interact with that. Like, The Hobbit is one of the most popular books ever. It's an Odyssey. Lord of the Rings, most popular books ever. It's an Odyssey. Most popular things don't fit neatly into that 3-act structure. That's a Hollywood thing. But I give that 3-act structure so people have a place to start. And so let me emphasize that again. It's a place to start. All of this stuff is a place to start. You don't have to do it. But if you're looking for something that, hey, tell me what to do, here's what you do, and it'll produce a generally okay story in these elements. But if you need to be creative too, if you want to change it up. Do something different. Do something fun. Wandering old master warrior monk. Absolutely. I love it. I noticed that Westerns and samurai stories do have a similar feel. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about Samurai Champloo, right? Samurai Champloo is a Western, an anachronistic Western set in Edo period Japan, 19th century, late Edo period Japan. It's weird, but it's totally a Western. It has like the showdowns. It's the bad guy and the good guy team up due to whatever's there. It's just like a cowboy thing. It's totally like a Western. I love that cheese sketch where he ends up shooting the guy. Monty Python's hilarious. The dead parrot sketch. Yes. The Ministry of Silky Walks. There's a lot of good comedy there. I think it's something that, I mean, now it would be just forbidden. It's just like forbidden humor now. But it doesn't really, I don't know. I don't think it's like boomer humor, even it's made by boomers. Boomer humor to me is more like, young people are bad. These young people today. The Magnificent Seven is a remake of The Seven Samurai. There you go. Yes, 2 people said the same thing. Seven Samurai adapted into The Magnificent Seven. The hero's magic family in my story has a dark secret, but I need to decide what. What do you think is more morally reprehensible, incest or child grooming? Whoa. Child grooming. Because that is, you can have both at once. Child grooming is usually both. Really horrible. Personally. Do you like gin or Mugen better? Gin. No, maybe Mugen. I like Mugen better. I don't know. I wrote a samurai story. It's very much like a Western, so if you like Westerns, you'll actually like this one too. He's trying to catch a killer. Wow, sounds like a Western to me. There's a mystery element. He's journeying across landscape, fighting bandits. Hey, it's a Western, but it's just in Sengoku period Japan. There you go. The Japanese Ronin movie and the American Western have a lot of similarities. They do. And it's also about honor. Honor, the cowboy movie is always about an honorable man having to face and live up to his honor. Of course, that has a strong similarity to Bushido. You know, Bushido has like, it is honor, and the honor of the cowboy is very similar to that of the samurai. A brutal honor, an honor that discards life in a lot of cases. Talk about forbidden taboo humor. Try Blazing Saddles, and I'm surprised. Like, Blazing Saddles would definitely not get made today. Samurai, knights, and cowboys all occupied similar scenarios historically. Lawless area, need for wandering heroes, yeah. The knight errant. And really the 3 form a lot of our storytelling tropes. True. Damn those whippersnappers! That's boomers. Do you think that a story featuring a battle between science magic and spiritual magic would be a good idea? I think so. I think that sounds fun. Technology versus real magic. Yeah. That's a good idea. Actually, I mean, there's elements of that in my current big series, so obviously I think it's a good idea or I wouldn't have had it in there. Would you ever just tell someone to wait to write a book if you feel like the idea is half-baked? Or is an idea always going to feel kind of half-baked until the book is written? Depends on who you are. For me, I'd say just try it out. I mean, the worst that you'll know if the idea needs to be fleshed out a couple thousand words in. And chances are, if you do a little bit of writing, you'll kind of understand more of what you're trying to do. So, and to me, that's different from just like discovery writing. But yeah, have the idea, start writing it, and you'll probably have a bigger idea of what you need to go into detail with. You might get to a point where like, I really need to describe this in greater detail. I need to think about what they're doing here, and that'll help you. So I say just write it. The episode with Jen and the prostitute is probably one of my favorite episodes of all anime. Yeah, I don't remember it very well. It's been years. Most Mel Brooks books wouldn't be made today. Yeah, that's true. What are your thoughts on Don Quixote? I haven't read the stories in a long time. I liked them a lot, so I think they're worth reading. You know, most classic things. Anything that's like pre-modern and classic is probably worth reading. I should make sure I point that out. If it's postmodern, I'd probably say avoid it. Boomers did give us D&D. And then I think like millennials are going to destroy D&D. How far into a story do you feel is too late to introduce a major character, like a best friend sort of character? I don't know. I'd say if you're in the second half of the book, it's probably too late. So definitely by 50%, all the characters should be present in the first act in some way, if you're sticking into that act structure. If it's more of an odyssey, you may not meet the best friend until later on, but probably more than halfway through. Otherwise, you're just not going to have enough time for people to care about that best friend. It's funny, some people are trying to say boomer is derogatory now. It's derogatory because boomers are offended by it, which is why you should call them boomers. Cowboy Bebop is far superior. I have Cowboy Bebop. I haven't seen it in like forever. It's good. If you could find a great artist to collaborate with, would you be interested in writing a comic book or graphic novel? Absolutely. Absolutely. I would absolutely do that. But there's a couple things that would stop me. You know, money's one. It's kind of outside my bounds of expertise a little bit to manage the business side of that. You know, I don't publish a lot of graphic novels. I have friends that do it, and so I can obviously lean on their expertise to help me do that. I have lots of ideas that I think are fresh for graphic novels, and indeed are pretty fresh for the way that people approach it. Right now, the current paradigm is to either be working for the big publishers like DC and Marvel, and they're going to manage that. They're going to put out a book in a series every week and just be milking ancient IPs, or to be crowdfunding individual comic books, usually graphic novels rather than floppies. And you're going to crowdfund those and then mail them to people. And that's not really it's not a great long-term business strategy, because if I look at my books, you know, I could crowdfund a book, but I certainly would continue offering the book for sale. So what's missing, I think, is having that print-on-demand option, or just having the option to sell it long-term, sell additional copies. You know, suppose you crowdfund a book and you get 100 people to back it. That's 100 copies. There's no reason you shouldn't try to have something on Amazon where you can sell 1,000 copies over time. You know, a lot of people aren't doing that. And I think it's because a lot of the people that are in, say, like Comicsgate, which I would never associate myself with Comicsgate at this point, because there's no upside to it. The upside is so small compared to the downsides. I just wouldn't do it. But you know, most of the guys who end up being the bigger names in Comicsgate, they're pros. They're pros from DC and Marvel, and so they're approaching it the way DC and Marvel do, which is like, you know, you do the pencils, you do the inks maybe, or you hire someone to do the inks, you hire someone to do colors, you find a printer, you print the books, you mail them to people. or you mail them, you get them to Diamond so that Diamond will send them to local comic book stores. And I'm like, that's just such an old model. It just seems very inefficient. And I'm aware that a lot of readers, this is its own market that's been established over several decades here at this point. It's the local comic book shop. But like manga readers are totally used to buying things online or different outlets than a comic book store, especially a comic book store. So I'd be trying to think outside those lines a little bit. Like I would probably prefer to do something that's actually like what Jesse does, the black and white stuff. If you're doing black and white, you have this option of doing print on demand very cheaply and very well. Amazon's black and white stuff looks really good. And I think Ingram Spark, John actually told me Ingram Spark is the one who does their color print on demand stuff. But John De La Rose, who I already talked about on the stream, he's got, he's got a color book that is just out on Amazon. So let me see if I can show this to you. So the black and white, it looks really good. And the gray printing, if you want to talk about something, this is just a gray image, black and white image, still comes out really good. So the detail on the Amazon print on demand is totally good enough for most things. I think for black and white manga style art, it would actually look really good. So if you were doing, what size is this? This is slightly bigger than 8x5, right? This Blade of the Immortal thing here. So here's an 8x5 right here. So it's slightly bigger, which means that like you could probably get that as a custom cut or just do it as an 8x5 and people probably wouldn't care that much that it's an 8x5 and not something else. I think you can also do it as I think this is an A6 or A4 size. So you could probably get an A4, which is the size of a traditional manga. A little bit smaller than 8x5, as you can see. So you could probably do that very cheaply and very, very efficiently. That's probably what I would be looking to do. To just have a long-term sales plan. There's no long-term sales plan in the comic industry right now. It's all because the old pub style is we got to sell. We're going to sell the issues, and we're never selling another issue after this month. So the June issue of Spider-Man is out. Once those issues are out, they're never printing that issue again, except as part of some other collection somewhere that's going to be, probably a little overpriced for what's there. I don't like that. I don't like that as an indie author because it's just limiting your sales, your reach, it's limiting everything. It's there to, you don't print extras mostly because you want collectors to feel like they have continued value of their comic books, but that's not good for you as an individual. That might be good for Marvel. It might be good for DC. But if you're an indie artist, approaching it that way is really not a good idea. The idea is to put as much value for you, not to, especially on a long-term basis, not to just artificially limit the reach of your product for collectors. And in fact, it won't be collectible unless you're really famous anyway. So you need to have as much reach as possible. I think for graphic novels, you need to put it out as wide as possible, get as many people to read your stuff as possible. And then you can have a collectible version of it, like an alternate cover that is rare. Have one thing that's rare for the tail fans, but otherwise you should be going Spike all the way. You should be going the front end of consumership all the way. Get as many books put out as possible. If it's not widely popular, there won't be a collector's market for it. End of story. There's no collector's market for things that nobody wanted to begin with. A lot of these Image comics, you can find Image comics from like the 90s at like Goodwill stores for 5 cents a piece because no one wants them, or they end up in the bin. They get thrown away because no one cares about reading Image it's amazing art. It looks beautiful. No one cares about it because no one cares about it. So you got to get people to care about it first before anything becomes collectible. So I know that's kind of a sideways rant on it, but that's what it is. So I'd be really interested in working with artists that want to pursue something outside of the normal box. And I have access to, advice from tons of experienced people that can help me do it the other way too. So I don't know. Yes, of course I'd be interested in that. How many books did you write before you wrote one that you would now consider good? Probably 3. So I wrote a book when I was younger. I wrote this book. And originally I wrote 2 books, not this length, but much longer. So if you're thinking of this, the equivalent of 8 books of these, 8 of these, then I wrote Muramasa Blood Drinker. And so by the time I got through about 400,000 words of this story, I was ready to write something that I think was much more, required more skill. And so that was Muramasa. So Muramasa is probably my first good book. And these ones had to be heavily revised to make them good. Would you do a short story in a pulp mag like Strange Adventures? Absolutely. One of the things in Strange Adventures is mine. I'm totally down to do that. The reason I don't think about doing it that much is like a lot of these magazines, they're looking for specific kinds of stories, and I don't operate that way. I don't look at something that's like, maybe I could write that. I write what I want all the time. I never spend any time not doing exactly what I want to. So life is great, but especially with stories, I kind of figured out a long time ago, trying to write too heavily to market doesn't satisfy me. If I'm writing a story I don't care that much about, because I think there might be a big audience for it, I'm way less passionate for it than if it's just like the story that's with me. So this new horror story I'm writing, it's just going to fit in a classic horror, guys. It's a monster story, but I think anyone who's Gen Y or Gen X is going to really identify with this story because there are elements to the experience of Gen Y, Gen X, or even early millennial childhoods that will definitely resonate with readers. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet. The monster is called Danny Fisker right now. I don't know if I'll change his name. Fistful of Dollars is also a remake of Akira Kurosawa film Yojimbo. One is a Western, the other is a samurai film, just like Magnificent Seven. See, I didn't know that. Why isn't self-publishing comic books as easy as self-publishing prose novels right now? So it is and it isn't. It could be as easy as far as getting them out, but finding the audience is the hard thing. I think if you were just going manga. If you're going manga, it's probably easier. If you're going Western comics, the Western comics audience is so small now. And it's so specific, and it's so only interested in one little genre, which is the superhero genre. It's really hard, I think, to just capture their attention amid all the noise. Not that hard because they are small. So it's a small audience, but they tend to buy a lot of books. So it's not that hard. And I think there's definitely some people that are figuring it out more. I mentioned John he just published a print-on-demand comic book. That's amazing. That's what I want for the future. So it's gonna be getting easier. I think it has somewhat to do with marketing and the fact that the people who are kind of out there doing it are just operating on this old pub mentality. They're trying to fit old modes of operating into an indie pub area, and it's not ideal long term. Long term, especially the reason I like print on demand and long term sales. No one knows me as a comic writer or anything like that. So if I wrote a comic and I worked with an artist and we put something out and maybe we're both kind of unknown, crowdfunding is a waste of time. Crowdfunding is how you exploit an audience you've already developed. There's a reason the big crowdfunds with Comicsgate were only from established artists or people that had huge YouTube channels independently of what they were doing. They were leveraging a pre-existing audience. So crowdfunding only works when you're leveraging a pre-existing audience. I should say it primarily works by leveraging a pre-existing audience. You're not going to capture a lot of audience through crowdfunding, at least if you're trying to make a lot of money with it. But if you are doing print on demand and you're approaching it like a new pub author, then there's just infinite growth. You can start at zero and know, we're not going to make a lot of money right now. Promote. And over time, the volume of the sales build up to be huge. Over time. I'm actually already sick of boomer memes. I'm 18, but I feel they lack humor and are intellectually lazy while marginalizing a group is stupid. It seems hypocritical and cringy. Okay, boomer. Do you think comic books will ultimately evolve from the single floppy into the new standard form of graphic novel? I think so. I don't want to say I think so. I think so because I think to some extent it will, simply because the infrastructure is already set up for that. And when you buy a graphic novel, you just feel like there's so much value with it. You know, if I buy a manga for $15 and it's a bunch of pages, it just feels like value. And it's cheaper and easier to do. Think about, you have to hire more people to put out a full color floppy. You got to hire a colorist. You got to pay him money. Maybe a letterer. Maybe an inker too. Maybe you have one guy doing pencils, one guy like old style. One guy does pencils, one guy inks, one guy colors, one guy letters, one guy writes. You have like 5 people involved. That's a lot of people. Whereas with manga, it's just like one guy can do it all. I actually have a lot of Image comics that I don't care about. So you're telling the truth. Yeah, I know. I can't continually hear this. Like, I got this stack of Image comics from the 90s that I read once and I don't remember. And like, nothing ever happened. They didn't become collectible. They were sold like, oh, this is going to be so collectible, rockstar artists. And then it didn't happen. Epstein memes are getting old too. Yeah, they are. If I read another one, I'm going to kill myself, unlike Jeffrey Epstein, who didn't. Let's see here. Do you think it's possible for the comic book audience to ever become as large as it was in the 1940s again? If in absolute numbers, yes. As a percentage, probably no. But that's because there's alternative forms of entertainment. So as you diversify forms of entertainment, it's hard to capture that same number of people. You know, people who read comics in the 40s, what else were they doing? They could read a novel. Okay, they could read a comic, or they could listen to the radio. Those are your only 3 forms of cheap and readily available entertainment. Whereas somebody in 2019, which is going to be 2020 soon, they can play video games, watch TV, watch videos on demand, Netflix, YouTube. They could listen to the radio, listen to music, listen to any music they want nonstop for the next 100 days. They could read comics. They could read books. They could read novels. They could read manga. They could read in their native language. They could have a book translated in their native language. They could listen to an audiobook. There's so many other things capturing your attention now. It's really hard. When there were fewer things, of course, those individual things are going to capture more people's attention. It's like, why won't we ever return to drama radio from the 1940s? There's no reason to. People have other options that they like better. I thought of the perfect name for the novel. Kuru. A YouTuber girl made a video saying 5 ways to release a successful book. Reason number 1 was have a popular YouTube channel. You're just leveraging the audience. Now, the thing is, I don't know if my YouTube channel is popular. It's more popular than other channels. Doesn't give me a bestseller. If I got every single person to buy a book, yeah, for sure, I'd be huge. But, I get out of 37,000 subscribers, I get 100 people to buy a book, which I'm super happy about. I'm very happy that those 100 people bought a book. But that's 100 copies, and then I have to sell all the rest to people who don't know me. There's a great channel called SWC Revived where they broke down the drama and talk about how comic books futures on the internet. I think if you embrace the diversity, you can sell a lot of books on the internet. Like, I would love to see more. Like, manga is super diverse. There's samurai stories, there's sci-fi stories, cyberpunk, just teen drama. So creative. Like, Japanese manga's all over the map. So if you want something that's a creative kind of story you've never read before, it's going to be Japanese. There's nothing coming out of American comics that's very original. There's just deconstructions of what came before. Very, very little that's new. I think the last thing that caught my attention was Crossed, which is just a horror. It's just a horror. It's just a horror comic that was serialized into a more brutal story. There's really nothing that new. Not a deconstruction of a horror comic. It was just a really brutal horror comic. But at least it wasn't like superhero stuff, There's just the superhero monogenre, I think. If you're either playing directly to that audience, either you're selling to the people who are interested in the monogenre of superheroes, or you're having to build an audience outside of that. And so I think because I probably wouldn't want to go superheroes, I'm just not personally that interested in them. It's nothing against people who like superheroes or like to write those stories. It's just I'm not interested in writing them personally. I think I'd have to cultivate a new audience that's outside of any of those established areas. I rarely buy single issue comics. Me too. I usually buy the omnibus. Same. And trade paperbacks, which are a better value and more physically sturdy. Same. I don't buy the floppies anymore. I don't have the money to, and I don't have the attention span to like wait. Like, give me the whole story right now or just forget about it. And I read a lot more digitally now than I used to. If I really like it, I'll buy the physical, you know. What do you think of the idea presented by SWC Revive that comic books have a future being made digitally and that memes could count as a form of comics? Well, we have web comics. Web comics are interesting to look at. Those have been around for 20 years, though. Have they supplanted regular comic book storytelling? No. It's kind of like saying serial fiction on your blog, which I've done. I've done that. Serial fiction on your blog has a chance to supplant book sales. On the surface, it seems accurate, but you got to think that people prefer to consume things in formats that are familiar to them, and formats develop in a way that serves the medium. So a serialized webcomic is about telling a joke every day like Dilbert rather than telling bigger stories. And so those things kind of cross over each other. There's nothing wrong with digital comics, but I think if you're looking to really sell the product, you have to offer it as an ebook on some level, right? Not have it on your website. Do memes count as a form of comic? I don't know. A form of radio drama lives on in the form of audio drama, such as the Doctor Who ones created by Big Finish. Yeah, and there's also audio. I think audiobooks kind of just take that place, you know, rather than having drama. We have drama that's visual, so we have extra stuff that's great. But if we want just audio only, people tend to listen to audiobooks. Doesn't mean there isn't like a market for audio drama. I think there is. Yeah, if you're trying to get a hold of me, write at David Stewart, because then it makes a big orange bar. Yes, okay, so I see this. Yeah, I'm talking about American comics. European are almost as varied as manga. Yes, I'm talking about American comics specifically. And the American comics artist. European comics, you're completely right. I could put that eyebrow. I can't do like this one. It's different on each side. My daughter started doing one eyebrow when she was like 3 months old. She looked at me and she's like, she does it now. She's 7 months old. She can do like each eyebrow separately. And my wife can't wink each eye, you know. But my son can, and he's been able to since he was like 1. My kids have great facial control for whatever reason. They're great. Do you think internet addiction is a major crisis among today's youth? Great question. Yeah. Broadly, yes. It's not, rather than calling it internet addiction, because the internet is just the way things are served. That's like saying an addiction to networks. It's an addiction to what's there. So the first one is social media is addictive because it gives you an endorphin rush. And I'm very aware of that because I'm on social media all the time. That's part of my business. This is a kind of social media to interact with you and be on Twitter doing hot takes and stuff. It gives you a little endorphin rush when you have a bunch of people retweet you. When I tweet something and somebody really huge, like, who's retweeted me that's big? Nassim Nicholas Taleb retweets me. It's like a big rush. Like, yeah, I'm getting attention. You know, I'm aware of it. That's addictive. You know, that's a little addictive thing there. And so you have to, I think it's going to be a problem for our youth because their brains have just been subjected to constant spamming, constant attention grabbing things that kind of numb them. And also this constant cycle of endorphin things that make it hard to find meaning outside of that and commit to longer forms of interaction. So yeah, I think it's going to be a bigger problem. You know, part of me wants to get rid of my smartphone and get a stupid phone just so that like I can't have that. Like I prevent myself from having that problem, and then I have to set aside time to do social media because it's my business. But at least won't be distracted. You know, I want to see my phone. I'll be there like, I have a thing. I'm gonna put something on Twitter right now. I'll just pay attention to my kids instead. That's the biggest flaw about American comic books. It's not as diverse as Japanese manga with many categories for child and adult readers with many genre stories to tell. It's not. It's a monogenre, and I think it's actually a problem. I've talked with people who are, way more knowledgeable of comics and American style comics than me. And they're like, it's not a problem. The audience is big. It's not a problem for that audience, but it might be a problem for the medium. And it's a problem for any artist that doesn't want to adhere to that. The reason I like horror movie stories is not so much because I like to be scared. They just always present the most interesting mysteries. Is all horror just more scary detective story? Not necessarily. But it is about drawing tension out and slowly uncovering something. Chuck Dixon once said superhero fans ruin comics because that's all they wanted. And David Sim once said that comic books have to compete with video games. I think both can be true. Chuck Dixon obviously knows his stuff. But yeah, I think by the time you got to the 90s, and you had a local comic shop, which is an invention of the 90s, you ended up with basically a situation where it was all about one thing, which is these superhero novellas, superhero soap operas. And that's it. And everything else got pushed to the side. I remember trying to buy Dark Horse comics in the 90s because they were something different. It's like, here's a Predator comic. They did the Predator and the Alien versus Predator comics, which were great. And that's how I got into Dark Horse and figured out who they were. They just did stuff that they were the Dark Horse. They did stuff that was outside that box. They did weird things compared to just, here's Spider-Man number 412, buying another Spider-Man comic. I bought 100 before. I'm buying another one now. Reading on a screen for too long hurts my eyes. I much prefer paper when I can afford it. Me too. I like the physical's different. It's a different experience. It just is different to see things printed on a real medium. I have one eyebrow constantly raised myself. It's just the way it sits. Makes me look naturally devious. It's like when on the Dragon Age Origins character selection screen, and you could do expressions to make your character look like this all the time. That's always a funny one to do. I've heard some of the old radio dramas like The Shadow. The Shadow's cool. If you can find those are kind of fun to listen to. Is writing a superhero novel worth it? Yeah. Ask Brandon Sanderson. He wrote Steelheart. Totally. It can be. I think it's actually a good way to cross into kind of grab an audience that may be underserved in the book area. So you write a superhero novel and you market it specifically to people who are, on Amazon searching for Captain America comics or something. Whatever comic books are hot, you market specifically to them. They click it, they find out it's a novel, and they're still piqued. They still pique their interest, and maybe they buy it. They're like, I'll try out this book because it's about something I like. I think totally it'd be worth it if that's what you want to write. I recently bought a domain with an email. Forgot how cool email communication can be. Getting a personal email from a friend can feel very special. I try to pay more attention to my emails. I try hard. You ought to see the things that Amelia Clark can do with her eyebrows. There's even a video in which she delivers a message solely through her eyebrow acting with subtitles to translate. Yeah. Warhammer actually just signed a deal with Marvel. I saw that to make 40K comics. The response was abject disgust and horror from the whole fan base, which is hilarious to me. There's a whole shop by my mother-in-law's house that's entirely devoted to Warhammer. I didn't go in it the other day. I went there to get Panda Express, and I was like, there's a Warhammer shop here? And I was like, I really want to go in, but that's a little intimidating. You go in and be like, hi, can I help you? I'm like, I just wanted to see what was in the store, man. I've never had a whole store of this stuff. Usually it's like a little corner where you're like, where's the Games Workshop stuff? And they're like, it's over here, dude. Come on. It's over here. And someone's like, are you here to play Magic? No, go away. Go get away. Get away. I'm here for Warhammer. What are you here for? You're gonna paint that? No, I'm just being silly, but yeah, like Warhammer stuff was always like in a weird little corner. The Games Workshop stuff. It's like you can do. You're playing Warhammer Fantasy. Okay, this is what we got. This is what we got. Social media addiction is already a problem with the millennial generation, 18 to 30. I see it in everyone I know, especially online. The attention span is an endangered creature. I think it's a problem with even baby boomers because they didn't grow up with it. So every time that they got on Facebook, it was like a rush and they really felt like they were actually interacting with people. Whereas I feel like me, every time I get on Facebook, you know, I'm like, oh, I'll check Facebook. And I'm like, man, I hate Facebook. None of these people are really my friends, you know, because I miss the real interactions. It's not real to me. So, I don't know. It is a real problem, though. Japanese manga and light novels have the same age and genre range diversity as regular novels. Yeah, it's great. I maybe we should write more English light novels. Maybe that's something I need to look into. But I have to read some first. I'm gonna start with this the greatest name ever. Let me look it up here, guys. Middle-aged businessman, arise in another world. There it is. Look at this. Look at this, guys. Someone wrote my autobiography for me. Middle-aged businessman, that's me. Arise in another world. He's even in good shape, which is how I imagine I am. Making a name for myself thanks to goddess power. Look at this. How are we not writing this, guys? How are we not making $1 million writing this stuff right now? And then we have to get people to draw these awesome covers of like this dude who's middle-aged businessman and all these awesome his like adopted daughters clinging to him. Get lost. The startled voice was from Amelia, grade 7 goddess who came to investigate the reason for the Onigawara house's transmigration. What am I reading? What is a light novel? This is a light novel, man. I'm going to read some and then I'll tell you what they are. And I'll come up with the best definition on the internet, I bet. For Westerners, at least. It's already morning. I can't believe this. Let's take a look at this. Dad, look. Oh, Yuna, you've already gotten changed. Shozu's head shot up and swiveled around to look at each of the 4 people in turn. Please hire me for this place. Due to certain reasons, I can only be in the city for about a year. That is why it will only be a limited amount of time. But I promise you, if you hire me, then within this 1 year, I will make this Elunheim Adventurers Guild the top guild in this entire city. Teleported to another world along the entire house. These are like Jav titles. There's a Twitter handle you can follow called Jav Titles. That's literally just the translated titles for Japanese porno. Some of them are hilariously long. Just like really funny. Just to read them, it's like someone named a porno that. Look at this. Dragon Slayer. Onigawara Shiozo was 28 when he met her. It was on a summer night when the rain was pouring down heavily. Being employed at a black IT company, his days and nights were fully occupied with flying around client offices. That day, too, despite it having been his birthday, he was headed home completely exhausted. The rain incessantly drummed on his umbrella without mercy. The boiling heat of the day, instead of alleviating, had gradually developed into an altogether thoroughly uncomfortable, stuffy mugginess. Shuzu loosened his tie, then quickened his pace. Or is it Shozu? It happened when he was almost back at his apartment. His eyes were drawn and transfixed by a woman in the middle of the road who had her face turned skyward and was allowing the rain to drench her. She was a young woman, seemingly in her early 20s. She looked almost like a goddess. The woman was so stunningly beautiful that Shuzu doubted his eyes for a moment. Her silver hair was dripping with rain, and her thin, white, one-piece dress clung tightly to her body. Her abundant breasts were showing through, and that was immediately obvious that she wasn't wearing any underwear. Oh my. Oh my. Do you have some titillating illustrations in here? So, yeah, light novel is Japanese for novella. Novella here we think of as length. There it's an approach to novel writing. It's not supposed to be taken that seriously. Is something the matter? To think that he would be the one to initiate conversation. Let me get on this. Hi. Oh boy, you haven't seen titles of light novels yet. How about I was reincarnated in a fantasy world as a sauna? You think there's value in nihilism? By definition, there isn't. His age equaled the number of years he had been without a girlfriend. Aside from work-related instances, I have to do that calculation, his experience with talking to girls was almost nil. Cursed with the triple combo of huge body, fierce face, and rough voice, he was feared by every single person he met. The women were no exception. Oh right, suddenly being addressed on the street at night by a guy who looked like a wild beast would for sure cause her to cower in fear. In the first place, the other party appeared to be a foreigner. Whether she can communicate or not is already doubtful in and of itself. Notice there's like a lot of tense not agreeing correctly. This has to do, I think it has to do with Japanese translation where they move more freely between tenses, whereas in English, standard English, you stick with pretty much one tense through the entire work, either past tense, present tense, or is there a future? I mean, future tense would be like will be, but you don't usually write future tense. Never mind. I'm sorry for bothering you. Shozu appeared in a fluster, then attempted to circle around to the other side of the narrow street. The rain, it drenched me. A pleasant voice that sounded like the murmur of a brook caused Shozu to freeze in his tracks. Huh? A weird sound came out of Shozu's mouth. The woman turned her blue eyes toward Shozu, then continued speaking in an amiable tone. It was so very muggy. I wanted to cool down. It's my first time getting wet with rain, but it sure feels great, doesn't it? I guess. Would you like to join me? Shozu had never imagined that the very first invitation in his life from a woman would be, would you like to get wet in the rain together? But you do know, right, that when you get wet with rain, your body temperature decreases, which weakens your resistance and leaves you susceptible to pathogens, which ultimately causes you to catch a cold. It'll be fine. But you do know, right? Raindrops these days are quite acidic and also pick up dust and other particles when falling from the sky. So the growing opinion is that it's better to avoid getting it on your skin if possible. Even he didn't know what he was saying anymore at this point. All he had was a single emotion, a single thought that he was sure of. Here. Shozu proffered his umbrella. A young woman was being drenched in the rain, all by her lonesome. That's a weird tense. She was being drenched. So I'm trying to think what that is. Pluperfect or something? We never talk that way. This is a light novel, guys. Them adjectives, is this a rolling novel? Yeah. Nick Cage, I read in that Deadpool's voice. This stream took a turn, and here it goes. A young woman was being drenched in the rain, all by her lonesome. Surely she had a reason for doing so that no one else could, and no one should guess. The rain cannot wash away sorrow, nor can it make pain more bearable. Look at how many paragraphs there are. That's why, at the very least, he wanted her to know that human compassion is something that is much more common and much closer at hand than she might imagine. Life may be bitter and painful at times, but there are definitely great moments too. Saying it seemingly more for himself than for her to hear, Shozu then pushed the umbrella toward her even further, paying no mind to the fact that he was getting soaked. You're a kind person. After she accepted the umbrella without replying to the compliment, Shozu said, Take care, and then dashed off at full speed. He's quite frightened of this beautiful woman here. With the look in her eyes. I mean, this is just it, guys. No, I'm talking to a girl. Second floor, wooden apartment. The external hallway was covered by a corrugated iron roof, but the fierce rain was having no trouble making its way in. By the time Shozu reached the door of his own apartment, he was thoroughly soaked, down to his underwear. It felt extremely uncomfortable. Shozu slid his key into the lock, then turned it with a click. But then he froze. Did I waste a perfect opportunity? The chance to hold a conversation with that great beauty would probably never come to him again for the rest of his life. And besides that, perhaps it was a bad choice to leave a young woman by herself out in the streets this late at night. Should I go back? He was growing worried whether the woman, who was very likely grieving about something, was planning to hurt herself in her despair. Are you perhaps under a misconception of some sort? Hi, what? Suddenly hearing a voice addressing him from behind surprised him so much that he almost actually jumped. Turning around, he found the woman standing there, smiling. I'm having a lot of fun right now. I'm just not feeling bitter or pained at all. I just decided she's Irish today, guys. Sorry. Did you follow me just to tell me that? She said brightly, as if she didn't have a single worry in the world. But I am in a bit of a bind, as I don't have anywhere to stay tonight, so it's not too much trouble for you. Entranced by her upturned eyes, Shozu could only manage a sigh-like response, like, huh? Seemingly having taken that as acquiescence, the woman pushed past Shozu with a, then pardon me, and entered his place. Is this all right? His home was just a place to sleep, so it was very tidy. To be more precise, there wasn't much of anything in the room in the first place, so there was no way for it to get cluttered. Despite the old age of the apartment, the bathroom alone was brand new. He hoped it was acceptable enough for a young woman to use without feeling uncomfortable. No. I'm here, though. The presence of such a bulky man should itself be enough to make her feel uncomfortable. Shozu hurriedly chased after her. This is great. Next week, join David Stewart reading Doujinshi for 2 hours straight. While I like the voice acting and iconic opening of the Shadow radio show, I much prefer the more grounded pulp novel version. It doesn't have the power to cloud men's minds. Dude, we're reading Japanese light novels right now, dude. I don't know what you're talking about. Manga girl with abundant breasts and no underwear looking like a goddess appears. Me. I'll be in my bunk. What do you think of A House of Leaves? Is it a gimmick or actually great? I haven't read it. I don't think I've read it either. There's a book titled How to Goodbye Depression by Hiroyuki Nishikagi. You need to look it up. It's similar to this comic. It cures the depression of those who read it instantly. I just figured out who my favorite audiobook narrator is. Thanks. She may turn Scottish later if your fake Irish accent is like mine. May I borrow your shower? It's going to be... I can't do a Scotsman in anything but like angry. May I borrow your shower? May I borrow your shower? Sure, go ahead. Over there is the door to the bathroom. Wait, you seriously intend to stay here tonight? Of course. You're also quite soaked. Would you like to go in with me? I think not. Shozu had never imagined that the second invitation in his life from a woman would be, would you like to take a shower with me? Leaving him behind with an, I see, she headed into the bathroom with a disappointed expression. A sound of splashing water different from that of the rain began reverberating throughout his apartment. Shozu took off the suit, then quickly wiped his hair and body off with a towel. He then changed into his home clothes, underwear and all. What should I do? For the time being, he straightened up in his bed. He was not thinking of anything reprehensible. With the excuse of, if she's to sleep, then it would have to be here, fueling him, he diligently took to the task. Then he set up the folding tea table and placed 2 glasses on it. He took out canned beers from his tiny fridge, then lined them up next to the glasses. I have no intention of getting her drunk and doing something to her, but... Realizing that he was filled with ulterior motives already just by thinking that, he returned the beers to the fridge. Well, then what next? The only thing he knew was that he could not manage to sit entirely still, just when he was in the middle of wiping the dust off the TV with a tissue. Sorry for having gone first. It's your turn now. Then I'll just... What? The woman appeared in front of him, completely naked. Not a single thread on her, completely in the nude. She was patting her silver hair dry with a bath towel, but otherwise she wasn't even trying to hide her ample breasts, her tight waist, nor her perfect V-line. Clothes! Please put on clothes! They're still wet. Then... Shozo grabbed some t-shirts and shorts from her drawer and threw them to her while keeping his eyes closed. There, I don't care which ones you choose. Just put something on already. Thanks. I'll choose something then. Hearing those words behind his back, Shozu somehow managed to dive into the bathroom while keeping his eyes half closed. But he did manage to stub his pinky toe on the way, and it hurt. A while later... I think I'll probably stop there, guys. This is the best narration ever, thank you. Now when I begin Needle Ash 3, I'll have the correct voices in my head. Somebody who was English, it might have been Film Girl, was like, I read Needle Ash and they were definitely all British. I'm like, yeah. Like they have a British mannerism to them, you know. Let's see here. After coming out of the shower himself, Shozu sat down on the table sat down across the table from the beautiful woman, with breasts so big that they were stretching out the shirt that she was wearing. Then, belatedly though it was, they finally got around to introducing themselves. My name's Sylvia. In human years, I'm 22 years old. I'm a goddess. My name is Onigawara Shozu, 28 years old, company employee. I guess that's middle-aged now, guys. I'm like, 28 is middle-aged? Bam. The humor in this light novel is almost like a Coen Brothers movie. Mom, what's a V-line? V-line. That, I don't know what it... you'd have to get the original Japanese to know what it... He might have said, like... He might have said something else. This might be like an editorialization to just kind of get it in English. To not show up as erotica. It's like he's looking at her naughty bits. And they're perfect, apparently. The two bobbed their heads towards each other in greeting, but Shozu's head was filled with question marks. What did she mean by human years? And goddess? What's with her? Seemingly oblivious to Shozu's confusion, Sylvia continued talking. This is my first time in the mortal realm. My initial aim was only to sightsee, but it's already turned out so much more worthwhile than I'd expected. I've already managed to meet a wonderful gentleman such as yourself, have I not? I see. Shozu gulped down his beer. He had gone to the trouble of taking out glasses, but ended up drinking directly from the can in the end. Is this alcohol? The woman stared curiously at the can sitting before her. Beside it was a bottle of tea that he had also brought out for her, but she didn't give it even a glance. It is, but if you're bad with alcohol... No, that's not it. It's just my first time. Let me take a taste. Sylvia brought it to her mouth, then tilted the can at a sharp angle. She downed the beer so heartily that Shozu found himself nearly falling for her. Wait, this isn't the time to be impressed. Wait, if you drink it that quickly, your first time... Papa, it's delicious. Sylvia had already emptied the entire can, and her white skin had a faint red flush to it. You probably shouldn't push yourself. I'm fine. She's already dead drunk? Oh, man. Yeah, I'm for All right, we're gonna leave it there, guys. We're actually out of time for the stream. That's a fun way to take it out. I do need to record more audiobooks for my own books, though, for sure. But yeah, maybe I'll read this, and then like I'll do some content on it, and you guys can laugh at it with me. Or like I could record the audiobook and be like, I made an audiobook of your light novel. You know, author Sai Sumimori, illustration Ichijirushi. It's so funny. I wonder if there's like, is there any more illustrations? No. There's just probably a couple illustrations like that. That's great though. All right. So that's probably going to be it tonight. Yeah, it's kind of like a comic book or novel hybrid. It's a heavily illustrated novel, but the approach to writing the novel is one where it's not very serious. It's a really simple approach. So it's very, very simple approach. Very easy to read. You can read it very, very quickly, and get it that way. And this is great because you could actually get it in the manga categories, which are hot categories to get into. There's a 1-star review. Someone gave it 1 star. I don't like it. All right. Okay, guys. Thanks so much for hanging out with me on the stream. Let me give you the links again. So, City of Silver is out now. It's going to be first part of a rather long series. Eternal Dream will continue, so please do wait around for that. Eternal Dream 3 will probably be out in 2020. And then Strange Adventures Pulp Magazine, please check that out as well. And that's going to be quite a cool project to back, and hopefully hopefully we get there. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and hopefully you enjoyed the silly voices. And if you guys want my audiobooks, I guess I can record them, but I probably won't do voices that are that silly. I'll try to be like a serious actor for that. But thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time.